On today's episode, we are talking to former first-round pick Justin Ornduff and getting serious about pitching, pitcher performance, and most importantly, we're going to talk some pitcher health. All of that and more on this episode of Mound Visit. Ladies and gentlemen, another episode of Mound Visit. This is episode number 66. I'm Casey Honigbaum, generally joined by the former All-Star and 15-year Major League veteran Jason Grilli. But today I'm rolling solo, and today we have Justin Ornduff joining the show today. Before we get into the episode, take a second, rate, review, share the podcast. You can watch us for free on YouTube every week and listen wherever you get your podcasts. We are a part of the Believe Podcast Network. Every team, every topic, everywhere. We want to also mention our sponsor of the show. The show is brought to you by Sweet Hand Sports. We are very excited to partner with them. Batting gloves, they got golf gloves, hats, whatever you need. They're a local Pittsburgh product. So we love being a partner with them on this show, and you can use code MoundVisit10 to get 10% off your first purchase. But without further ado, we got a special episode here today. Usually I get to talk with a former first-round pick every week, and this week it hasn't changed at all. 2004 first-round pick of the Los Angeles Dodgers, Justin Ornduff, joins the show today. He's now the founder and creator of Delivery Value Systems, something that I'm really excited to get into here today. So, Justin, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Casey. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, let's start off kind of right where I led off there. I think what's super interesting is the way that biomechanical analysis has become such a prevalent part of baseball over seemingly the last decade. And I think, you've got all these different, you got mustard and driveline and all these different, applications and ways to go about measuring your pitching performance. I mean, you could even measure your hitting performance with that sort of a thing too. But can you kind of tell me, I guess kind of a basic question, but what separates Delivery Value System from some of those other things, and how did you kind of get started in this world of biomechanical pitching analysis?
Yeah, sure. So that's a fantastic question, and we kind of answer it all the time.
Yeah.
And to boil it down to kind of the basic principles is we really set out to quantify movements in less metrics based off kind of traditional biomechanical positions, and kind of going back to when I got done with my playing career, I wanted just to answer the question as to why some pitchers get hurt faster than others. Very, general hypothesis. And at the time, this was 2010, 2011. And to start my journey through that, I mean, I wasn't a biomechanist by trade, kinesiologist. I mean, I was just a business degree, former baseball player trying to kind of make sense of the world at the time. And but what I started to do is I initially just started to go back through baseball history, which I think is something that's lost in the modern day culture of, if you ask a typical teenage pitcher who even Greg Maddux is or Mariano Rivera, they got to do a Google search, right? And so that's kind of sad in of itself. But you start going back and you start to look at the Whitey Fords, the Jim Palmers, the Koufaxes, even Don Drysdale. Like, there was all these different deliveries, but you started to look at, well, how could in that era you had a standardization of pitchers accumulate so many innings? And when I started to dig into it, I started to notice some patterns. And over a 4-year period down in North Carolina, and then starting to work alongside some Duke orthopedics, we started to build out, what's now considered the Delivery Value System, which is our version of biomechanical model. So we deal with a big word, which we call sequencing. So, if you think about the role and primary function of a pitcher is to get an out. And one thing that hasn't changed is, you get to stand on the rubber, you got a mound, you got a slope, you got 60 feet, 6 inches, you got this little strike zone to throw it into. And your job is to throw it in that box and do it over and over again. And those who can do it most consistently for the longest period of time, that they get rewarded, right? That hasn't
Yeah,
changed. So as
absolutely.
we went through it, our goal was to quantify, saying, hey, there are thousands of variations to move and throw, but there's then more specific ways to do it when your body's trying to tolerate it over and over and over again. So we weren't looking at like speed acceleration data. We weren't looking at performance data per se. But if you start breaking down performances, when I can't actually perform due to an injury, my performance goes to zero.
Right.
So that's how we look at it, right?
Sure.
So that's kind of where we took an initial 500, active and his former baseball pitchers. We took their time to injury. We started to assign these component scores of their delivery. So how it works is you got 6 component scores, 0 to 4. They add up to a total DVS score. The DVS score goes 0 to 24, 24 being the least amount of risk, the most efficiency, the more innings you can accumulate throughout your career.
Okay.
And now we have over 3,000, professional pitchers in the data set. But the key thing to understand is, I've been talking about this a lot recently, is no matter which biomechanical model you use, right? Ours happens to be saturated in risk. It's only as good as if you know what to do with it. Like, can you
Right.
help? Can you
Sure.
help the player? And if I come in and I say, hey, Justin, you got a DVS score of 8, your arm is about to fall off. Okay, great. What do I do about it? And so I
Right.
think that in the game today, the biggest thing that's missing is we have so much technology, we have so much data, we have so
Right.
many people that can administer this process, so many companies that can do it, but we have very few people that can, I like to say, cross over the bridge onto the field and truly help players avoid the injury. But you're never going to
Interesting.
avoid the injury per se. You should just try to delay the onset of a major injury.
Well, it's very interesting because I think that that's something that, and it's part of your, kind of your whole campaign too. The whole save the arms thing that you have going on there, and I think, it's fascinating because we see. I mean, even just take this year in Major League Baseball, for example. You've got, guys like, Cy Young winner from a couple years ago, Sandy Alcantara, goes down with Tommy John. You've got Spencer Strider going down, and it seems like that's only 2 of the bigger names that have gone down this season. And it seems like more and more every single year, there's more and more pitchers at the major league level getting hurt. With what you're coupled with more and more seeming information that's
Right.
available to them and to the teams, and I think that going off of the save the arms idea, is this something that kind of has to start, in your opinion, at the lower levels of baseball? Maybe, I don't know, middle school, high school, maybe college, that sort of thing. Or do you think that this is something that, because you mentioned you do have professional pitchers in your system, but I guess the question should be, do you think that this is a more important implementation in the lower levels of baseball, or is it something that's very useful and should be used more up in those upper echelons once you start getting closer to professional baseball and into professional baseball?
Sure. I think that the adoption of understanding sequencing or biomechanics really in the light of using mass and leverage more, physics more, to what we like to say tolerate this increased velocity, the increased performance demand. I think it
Right.
can be a bigger adoption if at the top levels you had a collection of MLB pitchers. Maybe they came back from an injury. They're having a lot of success coming back from injury, but they're doing it maybe a little bit different. They learn a couple things and they start to tell the story. How did it happen? What did you do different? And they telling the public and say, oh, well, I just had Tommy John, so maybe I should pay attention to this. And, that's why we're seeing now that there's so many pitchers now who've had their second Tommy John.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
And it's like, well, yeah, you just can't go in rehab and get stronger and more physical and think that you can just prevent the second from occurring. You're actually exponentially more at risk from it occurring again. So there's 2 layers, right? It's the top layer, but the grassroots layer is the young players I mean, travel baseball starts as early as 8, 9 years old, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So when I tell parents, I said, if you're going to start throwing any type of meaningful innings and you're going to start getting on a mound, it's okay to start having a conversation about how this stuff works. And that's why what we've tried to do is start to educate more people in communities that have the time that they're spending with their players in the community. They should be the voices. And
Yeah.
so I think if we can just kind of help that process along, provide them with more information, but most importantly, resources to do it, we can help essentially save more arms down the road, because this 11 to 14 age bracket is when we're starting to understand our bodies a little bit more.
Yeah.
The ability to throw harder comes up. And by the time you get 13 or 14, you're going through puberty and your bones are expanding and you're able to generate more force. Well, that's when we want to start to apply some of these things. But I think most critically in the game is I was fortunate not to have to grow up with it. But, if I'm starting to get conditioned to every time I go out there and perform, someone's telling me, what my velocities were, what my spin rates were,
Right.
and it becomes kind of a key part of what I'm trying to do. I'm gonna, make it a point of emphasis. I'm gonna care about it. So it's only natural that younger and younger players, they're getting stronger, they're chasing performance because there's more pressure. And now if you start to add in the NIL stuff,
Oh yeah.
who knows, right? Money involved earlier. I mean, I don't think we've seen the worst of the injuries yet. I think that they're just going to keep happening sooner. And that's why, as recently, you get Major League Baseball talking about implementing a six inning minimum for starters.
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that too, because I read the article you wrote, The Current Irony of Major League Baseball, which was a really cool read. And I think one of the quotes that I pulled that I thought was interesting is this expansion. You said this expansion of new regulations coincides directly with the rise of sabermetrics in front offices, which I think is interesting because you also talked about like banana ball in there too. So there's like all these different elements of this game that we've known for so long. And it feels like it's changed so rapidly in so many different ways that it's hard. It's almost hard to keep up with. And we haven't found that common ground, whether it's between, the unwritten rules or the written rules. But then on the other side of that, there's other things like this, what we're talking about here today, which is, finding the balance between, being an effective pitcher and not killing your arm in the process, or,
Right.
Finding out how to come back from those injuries in a better, healthier way. And I guess I wonder if you could kind of, to get back to that, what you were talking about in that article, if you could kind of expand on that a little bit, because I think that, the new regulations are something that we've talked about on this show a lot. And it does coincide. Like what you said is totally true. The implementation and the rise of all these sabermetrics in baseball, like, where do you think that the balance is going to come in, if it does at all?
I honestly think well, I don't know if the answer is should be, but it most likely will come from how players are financially motivated. And I think it's one thing to, go to college and you still got to kind of be, the more of a dominant performer or throw hard, et cetera, and you get to a power five. But you get into professional baseball, especially get to the big leagues. I mean, what am I training to do if I'm trying to get to arbitration 1 and 2 or free agency, but I'm still getting rewarded based off my chase rate and my 97 miles per hour fastball, and I'm still getting a pretty lucrative contract? Like, I'm still going to do it,
Sure.
So, but if I start to say, let's say as an organization, hey, we're going to pay you, and then I'm making this up. We're going to pay you a $5 million base salary.
Right.
If you get to 150 innings, we're going to kick in another 10 million. If you get to 200 innings, we're going to bump it all the way up to 22 million as your salary. Well, it changes a little bit. Now, it may not ever be that extreme. You got agents involved, but the point is, if there's incentives to be able to get to these thresholds again as a starting pitcher, I'm going to start to readjust my training, and that readjustment starts to happen earlier down the line. And so now you've got a whole generation of pitchers that are getting back to, okay, I still need this the floor of what's acceptable now has been moved up, but to be
Yeah.
able to maintain it for 4 consecutive years, 5 consecutive years is really the art of it. And it's like if a guy gets 1,000 innings and he gets a Tommy John surgery, cool. I mean, he kind of probably did a pretty good job there. But
Yeah.
if he gets it and he can throw another 1,000 or 2,000, hey, great.
Yeah.
That's okay for the game. But when you got high school pitchers getting, Tommy John surgery within 100 innings, and their careers derail, and very few of them materialize into top three starters, and that's bad for the game. You're
Yeah.
not going to get the same guys that you could. So I think the financial motivations and incentives that are commonplace coming up as you get into the draft, and as you work through the system and the organizations. All right, I know what I need to get myself kind of geared up for. I think that's could be a major factor in it.
I like that because, obviously those incentives all exist in contracts now, but it's all like bonus based where it's like you have your base salary already. And then if you hit 100 innings, it's like $1 million bonus or whatever. That floor, the difference between that floor and that potential salary is not nearly what you're suggesting, which I think could be a very interesting way to go about that, and just a way to kind of, I guess, like incentivize pitchers to focus on that longevity more and more. And I'm a Mets fan, so I watched at the beginning of this season, for example, part of the reason that they weren't successful as a team early in the season is their pitchers were going 3, 4, maybe 5 innings sometimes in games, and they weren't pushing themselves. And, the bullpen's taxed and all that stuff is going on. And I think, once they started to become successful, you had their starters routinely going 6, 7 innings into games. And it's crazy, for a casual fan, you might think, okay, what's the difference between 1 or 2 innings? But that stuff makes a difference, and it makes you that much more valuable as a pitcher. So it's fascinating stuff. But I wanted to kind of ask you too, because, you talked about, especially, some guys you're seeing now, one of the best pitchers I've ever watched, Jacob deGrom, coming back from his second Tommy John surgery, just had his first start, or since then. And that second Tommy John surgery, like that's becoming more prevalent as well. But it's also just the Tommy John surgery in general. And it almost seems like, when I talk with baseball fans and you talk about contracts in the off season and you're like, okay, well, do I want to give this guy a contract because he's due to have a Tommy John at some point? Like that's a real talking point now.
Yeah.
So can you talk about, just kind of based on the research you do, everything that, your company does, I guess, do you think we're ever going to find a way to slow down Tommy John surgeries, or is it sort of figuring out the best way to kind of, like you said, come back from them so that you can still have a successful career post that? Because, like you mentioned, it makes you more likely to have it again. Does that balance exist, or is that still one of those things that's kind of still, I guess, being figured out?
Well, I think everyone's trying to essentially figure it out, but there's just too many
right.
clogs. There's too many clogs in the system to when someone could essentially, even if you did your part extremely well or efficiently, you're still battling so many other external factors that essentially can manipulate or control the player, right? So I think that,
Right.
if you get back to, I talk about this, one of my favorite stories, but Tommy John himself, right, through
Sure.
2,400 innings, had the surgery, came back and threw another 2,000. I mean, that's why you get the surgery.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I'm doing it to extend my career. We have a saying that, Tommy John was a pitcher, not a rite of passage. And so I think that, to get the balance, I do think there needs to be some sort of regulation over this travel baseball and showcase stuff. I think there needs to be some sort of advisory board to which, there's no reason where 8 and 9, 10, 11-year-old kids should be playing tournaments in January and February. I mean, that's just ludicrous to me. And
do you think too, not to cut you off, but on that topic, do you think too that like seeing stuff on social media where certain scouting organizations and these showcase organizations are posting like, hey, this is what the top 13-year-olds at this age group are throwing, and it's 94, and places like, do you think that plays into it as well, kind of to carry on with what you were saying there?
1,000%.
Yeah.
I mean, part of what I've done, in the past is, our facility in Michigan, I mean, we were seeing 110 to 120 youth pitchers a week. And, you start talking to the parents and you start to see it, we got to go to this tournament. We got to go do this. And the problem becomes, I'm going to play in these tournaments with travel ball. And then I got my private pitching coach. And then my high school's working out with their strength and conditioning. It's like, whoa, wait a second. Like, next thing you know, you've got 4 to 5 max intensity type workouts per week. And it's just like, where does it ever end? And there's just this, there's a FOMO. I mean, there's FOMO on the parent side, there's FOMO on the kid side. If all your peers and your buddies are doing these tournaments and one guy, it's like, whoa, he got, he's number 1 in the state or number 5 in the state. And luckily they have changed the rules now where you can't commit into your junior year again. And it's not all these freshman, sophomore commits and these kids at 14, like, before they got hair under their armpits saying like, oh my God, I gotta get to college. I mean, that's just, it's just crazy. And so, and I like to say, I mean, at the end of the day, it's still adults running organizations that are essentially using young players to help market and grow their organizations from the social media side. I mean, that's what it is. And so there's some players that get through and they do just fine. And, great. It's a cool success story. But for every one of those, there's probably 5 others that don't. And so I think that's where some of the population, we got to figure that out better. And I think, that advisory board or some governance there probably makes sense. And it doesn't have to be overbearing. It just is like, let's just be logical. Because the one thing that history tells us is that, whether you're Bob Gibson or Nolan Ryan, I mean, there's so many pitchers throughout the game that have proven that the human body can throw hard and it can get to a certain threshold of innings. But growing up, those pitchers weren't succumbed to the things that these guys are now. And so it's just an inheritance of damaged goods year after year, whether the player or the parent knows it or not. You're part of it. It's just what it is. And so I think to reverse it and start to get back on track, you're going to have more players start to have a pathway that looks different. There's nothing wrong going to a perfect game event. But if you go to 12 perfect game events before the age of 14, okay. So, I mean, it's just kind of, I don't know what that is, but hey, it's part of it.
No, that's a great point. You kind of answered it a little bit, but that was what I was thinking. Because you mentioned some of those, those pitchers that, some of the all-time greats who, kids today who are growing up and starting to get into baseball might not know as much about. And that's, Bob Gibson, one of those guys in particular. The guy would pitch both legs of a doubleheader and be fine. And that's, that's unheard of. That's alien stuff that when you think about that now. But that's kind of what I wanted to ask too, because that's got to be the biggest difference, right, between a lot of the guys that you see coming up, the hardest throwers, the best pitchers in today's game, compared to those, the best pitchers from those generations when you talk about a Nolan Ryan or a Bob Gibson, guys like that, Greg Maddux. Obviously, Greg Maddux, not a fireballer, but someone who threw a hell of a lot of innings in his major league career. When you analyzed all of that and looked at the differences in pitchers from, past generations and pitchers from this generation, was that the biggest difference that you noticed in terms of the stress already being put on their bodies at such a young age? And I wonder too, to kind of piggyback off of that, and I wonder how much this adds in as well, but the specialization in sport at such a young age, I wonder if you've seen that play into it as well.
I have. I've seen it all. I mean, I think there hasn't been much I haven't seen. I drew this for you. Can you see
let's
it?
see. I put it a little closer to the camera. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. Yep.
Can you see that? All right.
Yeah.
So this is essentially an abstract drawing of a baseball pitcher and his windup, right? I did not. This wasn't my original content or
Okay.
drawing. I got it from Sandy Koufax, and
Wow. Name drop. I
so
love it. There you go. That's pretty good.
well, you know, that's one of those things. Like I tell everybody, I've never been able to help a baseball pitcher without sitting down with them and getting to know what they're trying to do, ask them some simple questions, have them kind of start to talk and feel comfortable talking about their delivery. And then I start to, I'll say, hey, have you ever seen, Nolan Ryan, Jim Palmer, Whitey Ford, Bob Gibson, Sandy Koufax throw a ball? And most of the time it's no. And
Sure.
then I always tell them, I said, well, when I was doing my research and I was reading, and you start to read, Koufax's thoughts on pitching. And there's a difference between, I think, Koufax and a lot of other pitchers because Koufax is like revered. And you could drop statistics and data you want to on pitchers, but Koufax was revered. It was like stories about what he used to do. But until this day, I've never seen a delivery or someone move like him. And
Interesting.
so I think that's why he just is different. I mean, there's everything that we've ever spit through in terms of players and patterns and movements. He just did it, to me, more optimally in terms of how to engineer your body to throw a ball.
Huh.
And so when I show like a 13-year-old pitcher and his parents Sandy Koufax throw a ball, they're like, whoa, I've never seen that. And then I say, have you ever seen anyone in your life among your peer group throw anything close to this? And they always say no. And I said, so how could you growing up possibly know that bigger, better, more optimal movement exists? You don't. And so how are you going to get it from? You just going to go to the baseball almanac or start to go to YouTube maybe, right? So when then I start to do that drawing, I said, look, you don't have to look like Koufax, but you need to understand how sequencing works. And so I could sequence going to golf swing. I could sequence going to my refrigerator and getting some more water, right? But when the task, it goes back to what I said in the beginning. If I'm tasked with throwing a baseball 4,000 times at 50 miles per hour,
right?
Maybe not. Mechanics don't play much of a role. But when I'm tasked for doing it 4,000 times at 95 miles per hour, okay, I probably need to pay attention. One of my business partners, his name is Bill. He loves telling the story of, if I go and pick up a cardboard box off the garage floor, I mean, I could probably do it a variety of ways and not hurt myself or throw out my back. But, if there's 200 pounds in that cardboard box and I go to pick it up the wrong way, I might feel it on my back. So it just goes into play. I mean, I think that when you get into mechanics, and everyone will tell you, well, there's no one way to throw a ball. And listen, I agree with them. There's no one way. There's been a ton of ways. And inside, I think some critics of mine have always said, oh, you got this score, right? And like, how can you position everybody into one singular number? And I said, well, we do it all the time with SAT scores and 40-yard dashes and, your FICO score. We do it, and it's just part of our culture. And I said, but inside the score, there's also over 10,000 combinations of a DVS score. So a lot of individualism there, but at the same time, understanding there are some of those components that make up a more efficient, more tolerable pitcher. And to me, I wouldn't still be doing this if I haven't seen it work. And I think that's the big piece for me. I love the data. I love what biomechanics. I love the research. But I love the most being able to see someone succeed out in the field.
That's awesome. Could you, I guess, as we close off here, can you share, maybe one or two of your favorite instances of this, of those success stories? Because I think that's always something that's fun to hear as well.
Yeah, I'll give you kind of two that kind of span the game, right? So from the youth level, we in Michigan, we had our facility in Madison Heights, and it's when I was working as part of the United Shore Professional Baseball League, and we started to have players from Taylor Made, which is a travel organization, but they were part of Taylor North Little League, and so they were, I guess, 11, 12, and they started coming into the facility. We got to know the coach, And we had 7 or 8 of their players come in every Saturday for about 4 or 5 months.
Okay.
And our focus with them wasn't, hey, let's increase your velo, let's get your spin rate up. It was very
Hmm.
simple about understanding the sequencing to a very like foundational level, being able
Yeah.
to repeat, help them finish. But like I told them, if you can start executing more balls in the zone, then you could effectively start throwing a changeup. But most importantly, if you had two pitchers that could do it before, we want to get you to 4 or 6.
Sure.
And so that next summer, when they started kind of doing this ride to the Little League World Series, they just were able to spread out more pitchers. They rested, saved their better
Yeah.
arms for the better
Mm.
teams. They advanced to the Little League World Series, and they won it.
Wow. That's
And
awesome.
so it was one of these stories where it's like, I mean, our commitment and our level of effect in that success probably was like minimal in comparison to their coaches and their community. But
Sure.
the thing that we started seeing from their progressions in their training is just more strikes, more consistencies, ability. When you're talking 11, 12 year old, that goes a long way,
Throwing
you
strikes
know?
at that age is just, I mean, you're 90% of the way there almost. That's, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And so that was cool because you're seeing
Yeah.
it from an 11-year-old, 12-year-old and their coaches start to understand some of these things from a very elementary level, but seeing
Yeah.
it applicable in the game. And then I think my favorite story from when I was at the USPBL, one of my close friends now, but player at the time, his name was Ty Hensley. He was a first round
Oh,
pick with
yeah.
the Yankees in
Hmm.
2012. You know, two Tommy Johns, hip surgery, just kind of
Mm.
had a stroke of bad luck, some injuries, and just kind of unfortunately got released from the Yankees and then picked up with the Rays for a little bit, released there, found himself in independent ball in the Frontier League. I think he pitched a season there, came back, was going to pitch again. They actually said, well, we really just think you should go to the USPBL and start to work with Justin Ornduff. And so he found there he was reluctant to come. I mean, you're at the bottom of the barrel, right? And
Yeah.
we treated him the same. Went through the process, had him start to understand his delivery, and he didn't do exceptionally well the first couple months. Some of this stuff was new, but I tell you what, he was active minded, open minded, started to understand it. You could start to see ball flight change. And then
Yeah.
eventually you started seeing them go 6 innings, 7 innings, 100 pitches, 110 pitches through a complete 9 inning game.
Wow.
And that built into his off season. And then he ended up with like 75 innings that year. And I think that was the most he ever threw in one season
Wow.
since getting drafted. The next year he comes back in 2020, the actually COVID pandemic year where we
Mm.
still had a season, and he became the MVP of our league. And
That's awesome.
he did exceptionally well. But the great thing and the cool story is for like a 2 year period, you could start to see the joy of baseball come back in.
Oh,
He enjoyed playing, he's not having to deal with injury. And so we were able to help him fulfill that. Now, unfortunately, we go back to that culture piece, right? Because
yeah.
he had the elbow surgeries before, from the organizational side, him trying to get back, they say, oh, he's damaged goods, two Tommy
Uh,
Johns. They didn't understand really the shift that he made from a
yeah.
biomechanic side that he could have another 5, 6 years potentially, right? But the cool thing is, and I'll have to send it to you. Fox Nation
Please.
Fox Nation did a story on it,
Yeah.
and so they came out and did some interviews with us, and it was a really cool deal. So I mean, it's just that to me is something to which I try to tell everybody. If
Yeah.
you want to start to an organization, you want to get into an MLB organization, you want to start to get 2 or 3 pitchers that can change the narrative. Well, you know what? When they start walking through the door after getting drafted, you better start talking to them and selling your organization about, hey, this is how we're going to do it. And if you
Mm.
don't, they're going to try to outsource it and figure out the best way to do it. And
Hmm.
so I think that one of the things over the last couple of years, I've tried to have conversations with MLB clubs about helping, but I've just never really gotten more in depth with those conversations. I don't
Sure.
know if people think that it's too much to take on, but at the same time, what's been like tried over the last 4 or 5 years hasn't really worked either.
Interesting. It's fascinating. This is a topic we could talk about all night, and I know that we want to continue this conversation with you at some point too. While Grilli's able to be here, because it's all fascinating. But I want to give you a chance before we close out here. Roll out the red carpet for you. Tell people where they can find more about you, more about the system. Obviously, we'll put links to all of that in the description of this video. But please tell us where we can find all that stuff.
Sure. Well, our company's website's dbsbaseball.com. And I think you go there, what our mission is and what we're really trying to focus on now is, we're trying to really make markerless motion technology, biomechanics, very cost affordable for communities, high schools, travel organizations. We want them to be able to purchase what we have, this mocap kit. And if you think about traditional mocap kits, you're looking at anywhere from 20 grand to 150 grand, and we're selling ours for $1,700. So it's definitely cost effective and affordable, and the software automates the analysis for you. And we want to help communities, right? So that's really our kind of main mission there. And then for me, if anybody wants to kind of follow along with the research and, kind of my thoughts and things on pitching development, just follow my LinkedIn profile is the best way to get my latest stuff.
Awesome. And you're a good follow on Twitter too. I like a lot of the videos you post. So all great stuff there. Yeah, absolutely. Justin, thank you so much for taking the time to hop on a Mound Visit with us. We'll have to get you back soon and talk more. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Mound Visit. Awesome stuff. Like I said, could have talked with Justin all night. But we are going to have him back on so that Grilli gets a chance to pick his brain as well. And it's not just me yapping over here. But thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. If you could, please take a second to rate, review, and share the podcast for us. You can watch us every week on YouTube, so please go subscribe to the show there. And we hope you enjoy, and we will look forward to catching up with you guys next week.